The lighthouse picked up on a hill at the mouth of Marblehead Harbor. 3 people who maintain it, full municipal team, day shift dominant operations. Public Works Department manages it alongside breakwater, seawall, navigational aids. Debris recovery protocols, legitimate municipal code chapter, dictate specific sorting, cataloging, storage, and disposal of everything that washes ashore within the lighthouse parcel. The horror, when the protocols are followed precisely, over months, the sorted and stored debris accumulates into something coherent, arrangements that weren't placed by anyone, objects that weren't in the intake logs, and eventually, the arrival of materials that could not have come from the ocean because they haven't been manufactured yet. The narrator is the newest member of the 3-person lighthouse maintenance crew. Not a solo operator, a colleague in a small but functional team with a supervisor and a second technician. No predecessor gap. No inheritance. The supervisor has been there 11 years and is open, competent, and non-mysterious. The second technician has been there 3 years. There is no secret being hidden from the narrator. The horror emerges in front of all 3 of them simultaneously. The moral dilemma, the debris, when assembled according to protocol, is producing objects of genuine, measurable humanitarian value, medical devices, water purification components, structural materials that test as superior to anything commercially available. The city has quietly begun using them. The dilemma is whether to continue following the protocol knowing it is producing things that help real people, or to stop because the source is unknown, the mechanism is impossible, and the most recent assemblages have begun including components that contain biological tissue. This is not, the phenomenon improves the system it parasitizes, the lighthouse and its maintenance are unchanged. The protocol is producing external goods that leave the site entirely. And it is not investigation as vector, studying the phenomenon has no effect on it whatsoever. It proceeds regardless of whether anyone is paying attention. The ending, genuinely bifurcated. The team splits. 2 choose to continue. 1 chooses to stop. Both choices produce real, distinct, non-converging consequences. Neither is secretly the same as the other. Now all right. The lighthouse maintenance crew operates 4 days a week, 7 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. The narrator works alongside Rita Kavanaugh, supervisor, 11 years, and Dennis Park, technician, 3 years. Their purview includes Marblehead Light, the adjacent breakwater, 2 channel markers, and the 1.4-acre municipal parcel surrounding the lighthouse itself. Marblehead, Massachusetts. Real place. Real lighthouse. I'll fictionalize enough to avoid issues, call it Harbormouth Light, in the town of Carrick, Massachusetts. Debris recovery protocols are Chapter 14.7 of the Municipal Public Works Operations Manual, written in 2009 after a hazmat incident involving medical waste that washed up during a nor'easter. The protocols are detailed, boring, and legitimate, sort by material class, photograph, log GPS of recovery location, bag and tag organic material separately, store in the debris shed, a converted equipment building on the parcel, report anything hazardous to the harbor master's office. The protocols specify storage duration, 90 days for unclaimed property, 30 for organic, immediate disposal for hazmat, arrangement within the shed, material class separated on labeled shelving, organic material in sealed containers in the cold locker, and quarterly inventory audits. Everything about this is mundane, bureaucratic, and real. The horror begins when the narrator, performing a quarterly inventory, discovers items in the debris shed that are not in the intake log. Not mislabeled, completely absent from any record. Items that appear to have been assembled from components that were logged, but recombined into configurations no one performed. Let me write this story now. The certified count said 41 items in the debris shed. I counted 47. I counted again. 47. The intake log, which Rita and I both sign every Friday, listed 41. Every entry had a date, a GPS tag, a material classification, and a photograph. 41 entries. 41 photographs. 6 items on those shelves had no photographs, no entries, no intake dates, and no material classification tags. They were on the correct shelves. Sorted by material class. Positioned according to the arrangement protocol in Chapter 14.7 of the Public Works Operations Manual. Someone had put them there and followed the rules perfectly. But no one had logged them in. I should explain how I got here. I joined the Carrick Department of Public Works in March of last year as a Grade 4 Facilities Maintenance Technician. My assignment was Harbourmouth Light and its associated parcel, the lighthouse itself, the stone breakwater extending 210 feet into the harbor mouth, 2 channel marker pylons, and the acre-and-a-half of municipal land between the seawall and Harbor Road. I was the third member of a 3-person crew. Rita Cavanaugh was our supervisor, an 11-year veteran of the department who'd worked the lighthouse parcel since 2014. Dennis Park was the other technician, 3 years in. Both of them were straightforward, competent, and easy to work with. Rita was 53, methodical, union steward for our local, and kept a laminated copy of every relevant operations manual chapter in a binder she called the Bible. Dennis was 31, a former electrician who'd taken the civil service exam after his contracting company folded, and he approached the lighthouse the way he'd approached wiring, neatly, by code, with visible impatience for anything that wasn't to spec. Our shift ran Monday through Thursday, 7 to 3:30. The lighthouse itself was automated, had been since 1988, so our work was structural maintenance, corrosion control, grounds upkeep, optics cleaning, and the various federal and state compliance inspections that kept the light on the active aids to navigation list. It was good work. Physical, predictable, outside. The kind of job where you could see what you'd done at the end of the day. The debris recovery protocols were a small part of our responsibilities, maybe 5% of our total hours in a normal week. Chapter 14.7 of the Operations Manual had been written in 2009 after a storm pushed a ruptured Sharps container onto the rocks below the light and a DPW summer worker picked it up barehanded. The resulting workers' comp claim, the hazmat response, and the ensuing lawsuit had produced 23 pages of detailed procedures governing the identification, recovery, sorting, documentation, storage, and disposal of any material that washed ashore within our parcel boundaries. The protocols were specific. Everything recovered from the shoreline got photographed in situ before being moved. Each item received a numbered tag linked to an entry in the intake log, a physical binder kept in the debris shed, with a duplicate digital entry submitted weekly to the harbor master's office. Items were classified by material, metal, wood, synthetic, organic, composite, or hazmat. Each class had its own shelf or storage area in the debris shed, a converted equipment building about 40 yards south of the lighthouse. Organic material went into sealed containers in a cold locker. Anything flagged as potentially hazardous triggered an immediate call to the harbor master, who would dispatch the county hazmat coordinator. Storage duration depended on classification. Unclaimed property, anything that might conceivably belong to someone, stayed 90 days. Organic material that wasn't hazardous held for 30. Hazmat was removed within 24 hours by a contracted disposal service. At the end of each storage period, unclaimed items were either transferred to the municipal surplus warehouse or disposed of through the department's standard waste contract. Every quarter, we conducted a full inventory audit of the debris shed. Every item on the shelves was cross-referenced against the intake log. Discrepancies were documented on Form DPW 14.7Q and submitted to the department's compliance office. That was the system. It was bureaucratic, thorough, and exactly as boring as it sounds. For my first 5 months on the crew, the debris recovery work was the least interesting part of the job. We'd walk the shoreline on Monday and Thursday mornings, pick up whatever the tide had brought in, dock line, lobster buoys, chunks of fiberglass, the occasional shoe, once a lawn chair, and process it through the protocol. Tag it, log it, shelve it. Most of it was junk. The quarterly audits took about 90 minutes and never produced a discrepancy. Until September. The September quarterly audit was mine to lead. Rita rotated audit responsibility among the three of us. She'd done June, Dennis had done the previous March, and September was my first. The process was straightforward: print the current intake log, walk the shed with the physical binder, match every item on the shelves to an entry, match every entry to an item, note anything that didn't correspond. I started at 7:40 on a Tuesday morning. The shed was clean, well lit, climate controlled in the cold locker section and ambient everywhere else. Metal shelving ran the length of both long walls, labeled by material class. The cold locker was at the far end, a walk-in unit about 8 by 6 feet with a heavy latch door. I worked left to right, front to back. Metal shelf first. The log said 14 metal items in current storage. I counted 14. Each tag matched. I moved to wood, 7 items, 7 present, 7 matched. Synthetic, 12 items. I counted 12. All matched. Composite shelf. The log listed 6 items. I counted 6. Matched. Organic. I opened the cold locker. The log listed 2 items, a section of heavy rope with what appeared to be seal fur tangled in it, and a waterlogged leather wallet recovered with no identification inside. Both were in their sealed containers, both tagged, both matched. Total in log, 41. I walked back to the entrance to do my confirmation count, a full scan of every item on every shelf and in every storage area, just counting objects regardless of tags, to verify the total matched the log total. I counted 47. I stopped. Recounted. 47. I went back through shelf by shelf. Metal, 14. Wood, 7. Synthetic, 12. Composite, 6. Organic, 2. That's 41. But I'd counted 47 total. I slowed down. I went through each shelf again, this time touching every item, moving it slightly, confirming it was a distinct object. Metal shelf, 14 items, and then, behind the 14, pushed to the back of the shelf against the wall, 3 objects I had not moved aside to see during my tag matching pass. They were positioned neatly, evenly spaced, consistent with the arrangement protocol spacing requirements. They had no tags. I checked synthetic. 12 tagged items, and 2 more at the back, untagged, properly spaced. I checked composite. 6 tagged, 1 more behind them. 41 plus 6. 47. I set down the binder and looked at the 6 untagged items. On the metal shelf, a stainless steel cylinder about 10 inches long and 2 inches in diameter, threaded at both ends, with a fine mesh screen visible inside one opening. A flat rectangular piece of what looked like brushed aluminum, roughly 8 by 12 inches, with a grid of tiny perforations in a precise pattern. A curved bracket of some kind, heavy, with mounting holes that didn't match any fastener size I recognized. On the synthetic shelf, a translucent tube coiled neatly, maybe 4 feet unspooled, made of a material I couldn't identify, not quite silicone, not quite vinyl, slightly warm to the touch. Beside it, a molded housing of hard white plastic, smooth, featureless except for a single recessed port on one end. On the composite shelf, a flat disc, 6 inches across, layered, metal on one face, something fibrous on the other, fused together so seamlessly I couldn't find the bond line. None of these items were in the intake log. None had been photographed. None had DPW tags. But they were on the correct shelves, classified accurately by material, and positioned according to the spacing specifications in Chapter 14.7. I documented the 6 items on the discrepancy form, photographed each one, and brought the form to Rita. Rita's reaction was annoyance, not alarm. She assumed a logging error. Someone had recovered the items and forgotten to complete the intake paperwork. She looked at Dennis. Dennis said he hadn't brought anything in without logging it. Rita said she hadn't either. I said I hadn't. Rita went to the shed and looked at the 6 items herself. She picked up the stainless cylinder, turned it over, looked through it at the light. Set it down. Looked at the perforated plate. Ran her thumb across the composite disc. These didn't wash up, she said. I asked what she meant. Look at them. No salt residue, no fouling, no water damage. They're clean. They look manufactured. Recently. She was right. Every item I'd ever recovered from the shoreline showed obvious signs of ocean exposure, corrosion, biological growth, salt crust, abrasion. These 6 objects were clean. The stainless cylinder could have come off an assembly line that morning. Rita called the harbor master's office and reported the discrepancy. The compliance officer, a man named Ed Tarrant, came out the following day, inspected the items, confirmed they weren't in the log, and told us to tag them retroactively and note the discrepancy in the quarterly report. He wasn't concerned. He assumed someone from another DPW crew, probably the seawall maintenance team that occasionally worked the adjacent parcel, had used our shed for temporary storage and forgotten to mention it. We tagged the 6 items, entered them into the log with an annotation noting the discrepancy in Tarrant's instructions, and closed the quarterly audit. Form DPW 14.7Q was filed. Copies went to the compliance office and the harbor master. I expected that to be the end of it. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday morning, I opened the debris shed to begin the weekly intake review and found the 6 items no longer on their respective shelves. They were on the workbench in the center of the shed. Arranged together. The stainless cylinder was standing upright. The perforated aluminum plate was positioned flat in front of it. The translucent tube was connected, actually physically connected, inserted into one end of the cylinder and running to the recessed port on the white plastic housing, which sat to the right. The curved bracket was mounted to the edge of the workbench using 2 bolts I did not recognize, and it held the composite disc at a fixed angle above the assembly. I had not done this. The shed had been locked overnight. Only 3 people had keys: Rita, Dennis, and me. There was no sign of forced entry. The padlock was intact, and the hasp showed no tool marks. I called Rita at her desk in the main DPW building. She came down within 20 minutes. Dennis arrived at his normal time, 7 sharp, and the 3 of us stood looking at the arrangement on the workbench. "Did either of you come in here last night?" Rita asked. No. Neither of us had. Could someone else have a key? Rita checked with the department. No other keys had been issued. The lock was a department standard Medico, keyed through the municipal locksmith. The records showed 3 keys cut, all 3 accounted for, Rita's on her department ring, Dennis's on his belt clip, mine in my locker. Dennis leaned close to the assembly. This isn't random. Look at this. He pointed to where the translucent tube met the cylinder. That's a pressure fit. Someone who knew what they were doing connected these. And this bracket, he touched the curved metal piece. These bolt holes. They're countersunk. This was designed to mount on a flat surface. Designed for what? I asked. Nobody answered. Rita photographed the assembly from multiple angles, documented its configuration in the log, and told us not to disassemble it until she'd talked to Tarrant again. She filed an updated discrepancy report and requested a security review of the shed. Tarrant came back out 2 days later. He looked at the assembly, asked the same questions Rita had asked us, got the same answers, and authorized the installation of a trail camera inside the shed, department property, motion activated, infrared capable. He mounted it himself on a shelf bracket facing the workbench, aimed at the center of the room. He still wasn't particularly concerned. His working theory was that we had a trespasser, maybe a fisherman who'd found a way to pick the lock, maybe kids, and the camera would settle it. The camera ran for 3 weeks. Rita checked the SD card every Monday. It captured nothing. No motion activations. No images of entry or exit. 3 weeks of empty shed, undisturbed. During those 3 weeks, the assembly on the workbench did not change. But the shelves did. October brought heavier seas. Storm season was starting, and the volume of debris washing onto our parcel increased. We were recovering 8 to 12 items a week, up from the usual 3 or 4. All of it was normal: wood scraps, rope, plastic fragments, a shattered navigation light housing, a single rubber boot, part of a crab trap. We processed everything through the protocol. Tagged, logged, photographed, shelved. On the first Monday of November, I noticed something during the weekly intake review. On the synthetic shelf, between a tagged chunk of closed-cell foam and a tagged loop of polypropylene line, there was a new object. Small. A cylinder of clear hard plastic, about 3 inches long, capped at both ends, with a fine membrane visible inside. No tag. No log entry. No photograph. I checked the metal shelf. Between 2 tagged items, a corroded hinge and a section of stainless railing, a new object. A precision-machined fitting, brass, with 3 ports arranged at exactly 120 degrees. Clean. No salt residue. I checked the other shelves. Wood, nothing new. Composite, 1 new item, a thin rigid panel, about 4 by 6 inches, with a woven pattern visible in the layered material, smooth on both faces. Organic. I opened the cold locker. There was a sealed container I had not placed there. Standard protocol container, the same kind we used, properly sealed, properly positioned on the shelf. I opened it. Inside was a piece of biological tissue. Roughly 4 inches square, maybe a 1/4 inch thick. Pale. Not decayed. Not preserved in any visible medium. It was sitting on the container's absorbent pad, which was dry. The tissue was cool to the touch but not cold. It was smooth on one side and finely textured on the other, almost like a membrane. I closed the container. I closed the cold locker. I stood in the shed for a long time. The trail camera was still running. I checked the SD card right there. Nothing. No motion activations during the periods between our last visit and this morning. No images of anyone entering the shed. The items were appearing without anyone bringing them in, without triggering the motion camera, without leaving any trace of entry. And they were being placed on the correct shelves. Sorted by material classification. According to the rules. I brought Rita and Dennis into the shed and showed them everything. The 3 new items on the shelves, the biological tissue in the cold locker. Rita looked at each object carefully. Dennis examined the brass fitting under a work lamp, turning it slowly. "This is medical grade," he said. "Or better. Look at the machining on these ports. I've done hospital electrical work. The fittings on autoclave plumbing look like this, but not this precise." Rita was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I'm calling Tarrant, and I'm going to recommend we lock the shed and suspend debris operations until this is resolved." She called Tarrant. Tarrant came out again. This time he brought the department's IT coordinator to examine the trail camera system. The IT coordinator confirmed the camera was functioning correctly, battery full, motion sensor calibrated, SD card writing properly. He reviewed the card frame by frame for the previous 2 weeks. No activations. Tarrant stood in the shed looking at the assembly on the workbench and the new items on the shelves. He picked up the container with the tissue sample, opened it, looked inside, and put it back. "This is biological material of unknown origin in a municipal storage facility," he said. "That triggers the hazmat protocol." He called the county hazmat coordinator. A team arrived the next morning. They took the tissue sample for analysis. They swept the shed for biological contamination, nothing. Air quality, normal. Surface swabs, normal. The sample itself was the only biological anomaly. Tarrant authorized continued operations but increased security. A second camera was installed at the shed entrance, exterior facing. The lock was changed to a high-security model with restricted keyway. Keys were issued only to Rita, Dennis, and me, with a 4th held by Tarrant personally. A log sheet was affixed to the door requiring anyone entering to sign, date, and time their entry and exit. Rita asked about suspending debris operations. Tarrant said no. The protocols were mandated by municipal ordinance. Suspending them required a formal request through the city manager's office, and the justification, "Items are appearing on our shelves without explanation," was not, in his assessment, sufficient grounds. The cameras and the upgraded lock would resolve it. I asked about the tissue sample results. Tarrant said the hazmat lab would process it within 2 to 3 weeks and he'd share the findings when they came back. We continued working. We continued following the protocol. Monday and Thursday shoreline walks. Recovery, photography, tagging, logging, shelving. Everything by the book. And every week, when we opened the shed, there were new items. By mid-November I was keeping my own count. Separate from the log, in a pocket notebook I carried with me. Every time I entered the shed, I counted everything on the shelves, tagged and untagged, and wrote down the total. November 4th, 53 items. Tagged, 44. Untagged, 9. November 8th, 56. Tagged, 45. Untagged, 11. November 11th, 61. Tagged, 47. Untagged, 14. The untagged items were always clean, always precisely placed, always sorted correctly. They were accumulating faster than the tagged items. And they were becoming more complex. The first 6 had been components, individual parts with no obvious shared function. The brass fitting and the membrane cylinder that appeared in November looked like they could connect to the original assembly on the workbench, though none of us tried to attach them. But by the 3rd week of November, the untagged items began appearing in what I can only describe as sub-assemblies. 3 or 4 components already connected to each other, sitting on the shelf as a unit. One morning I found a device on the composite shelf, a flat housing about the size of a paperback book with the layered composite construction I'd seen before, containing a visible internal channel system. Tubes. Junctions. A small chamber at the center with what appeared to be a valve mechanism. The whole thing was sealed, integrated, and when I tilted it, I could feel fluid moving inside. Dennis examined it for 20 minutes. He set it down carefully and said, "That's a pump. A very small, very efficient pump. And I don't know what it's made of." Rita reported every new appearance to Tarrant. Tarrant documented every report. The cameras continued to capture nothing. The sign-in log showed only our entries. The lock showed no evidence of tampering. Tarrant was visibly uncomfortable now, but he had no mechanism for escalation beyond what he'd already done. The system was designed to handle debris that washed ashore, contamination events, and property disputes. It was not designed to handle objects that materialized inside a locked building in compliance with their own sorting protocol. The tissue sample results came back on November 22nd. Rita called me and Dennis into the main office to share them. The county hazmat lab had classified the sample as non-hazardous biological material of indeterminate origin. It was tissue, definitely cellular, definitely biological. But the lab couldn't identify the species. It wasn't human, wasn't any marine mammal in their reference database, wasn't fish, wasn't bird. The cellular structure was consistent with mammalian epithelial tissue but with organizational features not corresponding to any cataloged organism. The lab recommended forwarding the sample to a university research facility for further analysis. Tarrant had approved the transfer. Rita read us the key line from the report: "The sample exhibits no decomposition markers despite the absence of any preservative medium." Cellular viability at the time of testing was estimated at greater than 95%. The tissue had been sitting in an unrefrigerated container in our cold locker, which was cooled, not frozen, around 40 degrees Fahrenheit, for 18 days. And it was still essentially alive. December changed things. The rate of appearance accelerated. I was counting 20+ untagged items per week. The workbench assembly had grown, not because anyone had added to it, but because new components were appearing already connected to it, extending its structure outward. The translucent tube now branched into 3 lines, each terminating at a different subassembly. The perforated plate had been joined by a second, larger plate mounted parallel to it with a precise gap between them. The bracket held not 1 but 4 composite discs at different angles. And there were now 3 more sealed containers in the cold locker. Each one containing tissue. The tissue pieces were different from each other. One was tubular, a section of what looked like a biological vessel, a vein or conduit of some kind, about 6 inches long, open at both ends. One was a flat sheet similar to the first sample but larger, roughly 8 by 10 inches, with a visible pattern of darker lines running through it, vascular, maybe, or neural. The third was dense, compact, and heavy for its size, a solid mass about the size of a golf ball, reddish-gray, with a faintly visible rhythmic contraction. It was pulsing. Not mechanically. Not from vibration. The mass was contracting and expanding on its own, roughly once every 4 seconds, sitting in its sealed container in the cold locker of a municipal debris shed on the Massachusetts coast. The three of us stood looking at it. Nobody spoke for a long time. Dennis said, "That's a heart." Rita said, "It's a piece of tissue exhibiting rhythmic contraction." Dennis looked at her. "Rita, that's a heart. Or part of one." Rita closed the container, closed the cold locker, and walked outside. I followed her. She stood by the seawall looking at the harbor for several minutes. "I'm going to call the city manager's office directly," she said. "Tarrant doesn't have the authority for what this needs." She called. She spoke to the deputy city manager, a woman named Sandra Chen, and described the situation factually: untagged items appearing in a secured municipal facility with no evidence of entry, biological material of unidentified origin, tissue exhibiting autonomous function. She requested a formal review and suspension of debris operations pending investigation. Chen asked Rita to email a written summary. Rita did, that afternoon, attaching all discrepancy reports, camera logs, the hazmat lab results, and her own photographs. Chen acknowledged receipt and said she would convene a review within the week. The review happened on December 9th. Chen, Tarrant, Rita, Dennis, and I sat in a conference room in City Hall while Rita presented the documentation. Chen listened carefully. She asked precise questions. She looked at every photograph. She read the lab report twice. At the end, she asked to see the shed. We drove to the parcel. Rita unlocked the shed. Chen walked the shelves slowly, looking at each item, tagged and untagged, without touching anything. She stood at the workbench and studied the growing assembly for a long time. She opened the cold locker and looked at the containers. She did not open the container with the pulsing mass. When she came out, she was composed but clearly processing something significant. "How many untagged items are currently in the shed?" she asked. I checked my notebook. As of this morning, 83. And when the first 6 appeared in September, the total tagged inventory was 41. Yes. So the untagged items now outnumber the tagged items 2 to 1. Yes. Chen nodded. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I didn't expect. "Have any of the untagged items ever been tested for function?" We hadn't. We had documented them, reported them, photographed them, and forwarded the biological samples for analysis. But we had never tried to determine what the assembled components actually did. It hadn't occurred to us that we should. Our job was to follow the protocol: recover, sort, log, store, report. The protocol didn't include a step for functional testing of anomalous inventory. Chen said, "I want to bring in an outside consultant. Someone from the biomedical engineering department at MIT. I know someone. This stays within a very small circle until we understand what we're looking at." She made a call that afternoon. 4 days later, a man named Dr. Lien Voss arrived from Cambridge with a graduate student and a case of portable analytical equipment. Voss spent 2 days in the shed. He catalogued every untagged item with his own system, separate from ours, and ran a series of non-destructive tests on the larger sub-assemblies and on the tissue samples. His graduate student, a woman named Priya Chandrasekharan, set up a portable imaging station and produced microscopic views of the tissue that she shared with us on a laptop screen. On the 3rd day, Voss asked to meet with all of us: Chen, Tarrant, Rita, Dennis, and me. The mechanical components, he said, are a filtration and fluid processing system. Specifically, they appear to be a water purification assembly of a design I've never seen. The filtration membrane in the central cylinder has a pore structure roughly 10 times finer than the best commercial nanofiltration systems currently available. The pump assembly uses a passive pressure differential mechanism that requires no external power source. The composite discs are photocatalytic. They generate oxidative reactions in the presence of ambient light at efficiency levels I cannot explain with known materials. He paused. If this system works, and I believe it does, based on the engineering, it would purify any water source to a standard exceeding WHO guidelines for drinking water, using no electricity, no chemical inputs, and no consumable filters. It would be, by a significant margin, the most important water purification technology in existence. The room was silent. And the biological components? Chen asked. Voss looked uncomfortable for the first time. The tissue samples are not from any known organism. Priya's imaging suggests they are purpose-grown. The cellular organization is too regular, too optimized for specific functions, to be naturally occurring. The tubular sample is a fluid conduit with an internal surface that actively prevents biofilm formation. The sheet is a selectively permeable membrane. It passes water molecules and blocks everything else, including dissolved salts, with essentially perfect efficiency. And the mass? The pulsing one, Dennis said. Yes. It's a muscular pump. Autonomous. Self-sustaining. It has maintained its contraction cycle in your cold locker for over 4 weeks with no nutrient input, no oxygen supply, and no apparent energy source. It is, functionally, a biological heart designed to move fluid through a system. He looked at each of us in turn. Someone, or something, is assembling a water purification device in your debris shed. Part of it is mechanical, part of it is biological, and all of it is beyond anything I've encountered in the published literature. The mechanical components alone would be worth billions to the water industry. The biological components shouldn't exist. Chen imposed an information quarantine immediately. Everyone in the room signed a non-disclosure agreement drafted by the city attorney's office. The shed was reclassified as a restricted municipal facility. Access was limited to the 3 of us, Tarrant, Chen, and Voss's team. But Chen did not suspend debris operations. I asked her why. She said, because whatever is producing these items appears to be responding to the protocol. You follow the sorting and storage procedures, and new components appear. If we stop following the protocol, we don't know if the process continues. And right now, the process is producing something that could help a lot of people. Rita disagreed. Formally, in writing. She submitted a memo to Chen arguing that continuing operations in a facility exhibiting unexplained phenomena without understanding the source constituted an unacceptable safety risk. She cited 3 sections of the Municipal Employee Safety Code and requested formal hazard assessment by an independent occupational health firm. Chen acknowledged the memo and filed it. She did not authorize the hazard assessment. She told Rita she understood her concerns but that the potential significance of what was being produced justified continued observation under controlled conditions. Controlled conditions, Rita repeated. Sandra. Things are appearing inside a locked room and we don't know how. That's what I want to find out, Chen said. And stopping the process doesn't get us that answer. This was the first real crack between us. Not between the 3 of us on the crew, between the people who wanted to stop and the people who wanted to continue. And the people who wanted to continue had institutional authority. January was when I began to feel the weight of it. Voss had taken several of the mechanical components back to his lab at MIT for detailed analysis. He was publishing nothing, per the NDA, but he'd told Chin in a call I was present for that preliminary functional testing confirmed the purification system worked. He'd run contaminated water samples through the partially assembled device and the output was, in his words, cleaner than any analytical blank I've ever produced. It's cleaner than what comes out of our laboratory-grade distillation system. Chen authorized a quiet pilot test. She connected Voss with the Carrick Municipal Water Department and arranged for output from the purification assembly, now being fed harbor water through a temporary intake line Voss's student had rigged, to be tested against the city's standard water quality metrics. The results exceeded every parameter. Not by small margins. The purified water contained no detectable pathogens, no detectable heavy metals, no detectable organic contaminants, no detectable dissolved solids. The testing lab flagged the results as a probable instrument error and reran them. Same results. Voss told Chin the device could be scaled. The design principles were, he believed, replicable. If the biological components could be cultured, and he was already working on that, a single unit the size of a household refrigerator could provide clean drinking water for a community of 5,000 people indefinitely, with no power input and no maintenance. The city of Carrick began using the output. Not publicly. Not with any announcement. But Chen authorized the municipal water department to blend the purified output into the city's distribution system as a supplemental source. At first it was a trickle, a few gallons per hour through a single connection point. By late January it was 60 gallons per hour, and the city's water quality test results were the best they'd been in decades. I know this because I saw the reports. Chen shared them with us during a monthly briefing that had become part of our routine, a meeting in her office where she reviewed the status of the project, as she'd started calling it, and we reported on conditions in the shed. The conditions in the shed were these: the untagged items continued to appear. More tissue. More mechanical components. More subassemblies. The workbench assembly had grown into something I could no longer see all of at once. It extended across the full length of the bench and had begun incorporating vertical elements, rising upward toward the ceiling. The biological components were now visibly integrated with the mechanical ones. The tubular conduits ran between metal fittings. The membrane sheets were mounted inside composite housings. The pulsing mass, the heart, sat at the center of the system, connected to everything, beating. The cold locker now held 14 sealed containers. The tissue inside them was changing. Not decaying, developing. The samples Voss had left behind, the ones he hadn't taken to Cambridge, were growing. Slowly. The original 4-inch square of membrane was now 6 inches across. The second tubular conduit had lengthened by 2 inches. And new types of tissue had appeared in new containers, a branching structure that looked like lung tissue, a dense fibrous sheet that resembled muscle, a cluster of small spherical bodies I couldn't identify. I raised this at the January briefing. I said, the biological material is growing. It's not static. The tissue in the cold locker is developing on its own. Chen looked at Voss's most recent report. Dr. Voss is aware. He says the growth rate is consistent with a self-organizing biological system and doesn't indicate any hazard. Sandra, Rita said. It's growing organs. The room went quiet. We don't know that, Chen said. I know what lung tissue looks like, Rita said. I was an EMT for 6 years before I came to DPW. That branching structure in container 11 is lung tissue. And it's bigger this week than it was last week. Chen looked at her evenly. The NDA stands. The project continues. If you have formal safety concerns, submit them through the established process. Rita had already submitted 3 memos. None had produced a hazard assessment. Dennis was the one who changed the equation. In early February, he came to work on a Monday morning, signed into the shed, and did something none of us had done. He sat down at the workbench and began systematically tracing the connections in the assembly. Not disturbing anything. Just following the lines of tubes and fittings and housings with his eyes and his hands, mapping how everything connected to everything else. He spent the entire morning on it. At lunch he came to find me at the seawall where I was eating a sandwich. "It's not just a water purifier," he said. I waited. The purification system is one branch. There are 3 main branches coming off the central pump, the heart. One is the filtration loop Voss identified. One is a circulation loop that doesn't connect to any intake or output. It's a closed system. Fluid goes out, fluid comes back, but it passes through every type of tissue in the cold locker on the way. What's the 3rd branch? Dennis sat down next to me. He didn't say anything for a while. The 3rd branch terminates at a component that appeared last week. I didn't flag it because I didn't understand what I was looking at. It's on the composite shelf. Small. About the size of my fist, wrapped in a membrane layer, heavy for its size. What is it? I think it's a brain. February 11th. I'm writing this part from memory because I didn't take notes in the moment and I wish I had. Rita called a meeting. Just the 3 of us, in the shed, before our shift started. She'd been thinking about this all weekend, she said, and she'd made a decision. "I'm done," she said. "I'm not filing another memo. I'm not waiting for Sandra Chen to authorize a hazard assessment she's never going to authorize. I'm going to the city council. I'm going to the press if I have to. We are growing a human being in a municipal debris shed, and we are following a sorting protocol to do it." Dennis said, "We don't know it's human. It has a heart, lungs, a circulatory system, a membrane that Voss called epithelial, and something you yourself identified as a brain. It's growing. It's organizing. It's using our shelving system as a scaffold. What do you need it to do? File a tax return?" Dennis was quiet. "Here's what I know," Rita said. "I know that we have been following Chapter 14.7 every single day, sorting material by type, placing it on the correct shelves, maintaining the cold locker at the correct temperature, and the result is that something is using those conditions, our rules, our protocol, to build itself. We're the substrate. Our compliance is the mechanism. And every day we walk in here and follow the procedure, we're participating in something we don't understand and can't control." She looked at me. "What do you think?" I said, "I think you're right about what's happening. But I also think that the water purification system works. It's real. It's feeding clean water to this city right now. And Voss says the design is replicable. If we stop this, if we go public and the project gets shut down, that technology goes away. People need clean water, Rita. Not just here. Everywhere. And what about the thing growing in the cold locker? I don't know. That's my point. You don't know. I don't know. Voss doesn't know. And the part of this that nobody wants to say out loud is that the biological components and the mechanical components are not two different things. They're one system. The water purifier works because of the tissue. The tissue grows because the water purifier feeds it. The protocol gives it the conditions to organize. It's all one thing, and we are helping it assemble, and we don't know what it's assembling into. Dennis said, "I want to keep going." We both looked at him. I've been in that shed every day for 3 years. I've watched this city's water go from marginal to the cleanest municipal supply in the state. I've read Voss's reports. The technology in that assembly could save millions of lives. Millions. And maybe it's building something we don't understand. But it hasn't hurt anyone. It hasn't threatened anyone. It's been sitting on our shelves following our rules and producing miracles. I'm not going to be the person who kills that because I'm scared of a piece of tissue. Rita looked at him steadily. And when it's finished? When it's done assembling? What happens when it's not pieces on shelves anymore? Dennis didn't answer. The three of us went in different directions from that morning. Not angrily. Not with any drama. Rita submitted her formal resignation from the Lighthouse parcel assignment effective March 1st, citing irreconcilable concerns about workplace safety. She did not go to the press. She did not go to the city council. She told me later that she'd decided the NDA was less important than people's safety, but that going public without physical evidence, the shed was restricted, the photos were on department servers she couldn't access from home, and Voss's reports were classified, would accomplish nothing except destroying her credibility. So she chose the only form of resistance available to her within the system. She removed herself from it. Dennis and I continued. Chen replaced Rita with a grade 3 technician named Marcus Webb, who had no idea what the debris shed contained and was told only that a special project was in progress and he was not to enter the shed without authorization. His duties were limited to the lighthouse structure, the breakwater, and the channel markers. Dennis and I handled the shed alone. I want to be clear about what happened next because I think the sequence matters. The assembly continued to grow. By mid-February the workbench was insufficient. Components had extended to the floor, to the walls, along the ceiling joists. The biological and mechanical elements were now so thoroughly integrated that I couldn't identify where one ended and the other began. The heart still pulsed at the center. The tissue in the cold locker containers had outgrown the containers, the lids were slightly raised, the seals strained, and I could see material pressing against the transparent walls. On February 19th, I opened the shed to find that the tissue had left the containers. Overnight, the biological material from all 14 sealed units had migrated, I don't know how else to say it, out of the cold locker and into the main assembly. It was now incorporated into the structure on and around the workbench, connected to the circulatory loop Dennis had identified, threaded through the mechanical components like muscle around bone. And the whole thing was warm. Not the ambient temperature of the shed. Warm. Mammalian warm. I held my hand 6 inches from the surface and I could feel it, a radiant heat, steady, like standing near a person. I called Dennis. He came in and stood beside me. We didn't speak for a long time. The assembly was breathing. Not visibly. Not with any motion I could see. But I could hear it, a faint, rhythmic sound, barely audible over the hum of the cold locker compressor. An intake and an exhalation, slow and steady, roughly 12 cycles per minute. Dennis put his hand directly on the surface. He held it there for 10 seconds, then pulled it back. "It's got a pulse," he said. "Not just the heart. The whole thing. I can feel it through the housing." I went home that night and sat in my apartment and thought about what I was doing. I thought about Rita's question, what happens when it's finished? I thought about the water flowing into the city's distribution system. Clean water. The cleanest water in the state. Going to homes and schools and hospitals. Going to people who drank it and were healthier for it. I thought about the thing in the shed that was making that possible. The thing that followed our rules, used our shelves, grew inside our protocol, and was now breathing. And I thought about the fact that in 3 days, new items would appear. More components. More tissue. More of whatever it was becoming. And that I would walk in, document them, place them where they belonged according to Chapter 14.7, and leave. And the next day I would do it again. I wasn't investigating. I wasn't feeding it through attention or study. My role was custodial. I followed the debris protocol. I sorted by material class. I maintained the cold locker. I kept the intake log. And the protocol did the rest. Rita was right. Our compliance was the mechanism. But Dennis was right, too. The water was real. The need was real. And nothing had been harmed. The question I couldn't answer, the one I still can't answer, is whether those two things can both be true at the same time. Whether something can be simultaneously a genuine, measurable good and an act of participation in something you cannot see the end of. Whether following the rules correctly, when the rules produce something unprecedented, makes you responsible for what they produce. Or whether the rules are just rules, and what grows inside them is something else entirely. I'm writing this on February 27th. This morning when I opened the shed, the assembly was different. The mechanical components, the filtration housings, the plates, the bracket, the fittings, were gone. Not removed. Incorporated. Absorbed into the biological structure, which had expanded to fill the entire workbench and most of the floor space around it. What had been steel and aluminum and composite was now inside a continuous living surface. I could still see the outlines of some components beneath the tissue, the way you can see bones beneath skin. The breathing was louder. The pulse was visible, a slow, rhythmic movement across the entire surface, coordinated, like watching a sleeping chest rise and fall. And there was something new. At the center of the mass, where the pulsing heart had always been, the surface was different. Smoother. Lighter in color. Shaped in a way that I recognized but didn't want to recognize. It was a face. Not detailed. Not complete. But the topology was unmistakable, 2 slight depressions where eyes would be, a raised ridge suggesting a nose, a faint horizontal line that could become a mouth. It was smoothed over, featureless, like a face seen through frosted glass. But it was oriented upward, toward the ceiling, and as I watched, the line that might be a mouth moved. Just slightly. Just once. I closed the shed. I locked it. I sat on the bench by the seawall and called Dennis. "Don't come in today," I said. "Why?" I told him what I'd seen. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Is it still breathing?" "Yes." "Is the water system still running?" I checked the monitoring app on my phone. Chen had given us access to the real-time flow data from the distribution connection point. 62 gallons per hour. Output quality, nominal. All parameters within spec. The cleanest water in the state, flowing to 31,000 people. "Yes," I said. "It's still running." "Then I'll be there in 20 minutes. Dennis came. We opened the shed together. The face had not changed. It was still there, still smoothed, still featureless except for the faint suggestion of structure beneath the surface. The breathing continued. The pulse continued. The water system continued. Dennis looked at it for a long time. He checked the flow data. He checked the distribution quality. He looked at me. "What do we do?" he asked. "I don't know. If we stop, if we lock this shed and walk away and never come back, the water stops. 31,000 people lose the cleanest supply they've ever had, and Voss loses his chance to replicate the technology. And if we don't stop?" Dennis looked at the face in the tissue. "Then we find out what it becomes." I thought about Rita. About her steady, principled refusal. About her decision to leave because she couldn't reconcile what the protocol was building with what the protocol was supposed to do. She was right. She was right about all of it. And the water was still flowing. I filed my quarterly report this morning. Form DPW 14.7Q, January through March. Discrepancies documented. Photographs attached. Copies to the Compliance Office and the Harbor Master. Everything by the book. Every line item accounted for. At the bottom of the form, in the notes section, I wrote what I write every quarter: all debris recovery operations conducted in accordance with Chapter 14.7 of the Public Works Operations Manual. Storage protocols maintained. No safety incidents reported. I signed it. Dennis signed it. I filed it. Tomorrow morning I'll unlock the shed, sign the entry log, and walk inside. I'll check the shelves for new items. I'll sort anything that needs sorting. I'll update the intake log. I'll check the cold locker temperature. I'll verify the water system's flow rate and output quality. I'll look at the face, which is slightly more defined today than it was yesterday. And I'll follow the rules. Because the rules are what we have. And what grows inside them is growing whether I follow them or not. The only question is whether I'm there when it opens its eyes. The water is clean. The water is flowing. The water has never been better. I just don't know what's drinking from the other end. I just don't know what's drinking from the other end. March 3rd. Dennis and I developed a rhythm. We didn't discuss it, it formed the way routines do when two people share a space long enough. Every morning at 7 o'clock I unlocked the shed, signed the entry log, and did the visual survey while Dennis checked the water system's flow metrics from the monitoring terminal Chin had installed on a folding table just inside the door. He'd read off the numbers. I'd confirm the interior conditions. We'd note everything in the daily operations log, a new document Chin had mandated in January, separate from the debris intake log, tracking the assembly's growth and the water system's output. March 3rd daily log, 7:14. Flow rate, 64.2 gallons per hour. Output quality, all parameters nominal. Assembly surface temperature, 97.8 degrees Fahrenheit, consistent with prior 7 days. Respiratory rate, 12 cycles per minute, consistent. Visible pulse, yes, coordinated, no arrhythmia. Facial topology, increased definition over 48-hour interval. Nasal ridge now distinct. Orbital depressions deepened approximately 2 mm, mouth line unchanged. New items on shelves, none. That last entry was the one that mattered. No new items. For the first time since September, nothing had appeared on the shelves overnight. I checked every shelf, every surface, the cold locker, the floor beneath the shelving units. Nothing new. Nothing untagged. Nothing clean and manufactured and impossible, I told Dennis. He looked up from the monitoring terminal. Maybe it's done, he said. Done with what? Collecting parts. It absorbed the mechanical components last week. The tissue integrated everything in the cold locker before that. Maybe there's nothing left to add. Maybe it has everything it needs. I looked at the mass on the workbench. It filled the center of the shed now, a continuous living structure roughly 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, and 2 feet high at its tallest point. The face was at one end. The water purification intake and output lines ran from the other end through a port in the shed wall to the external plumbing connection. Between those 2 points, the surface rose and fell with each breath, and beneath the tissue I could see, or thought I could see, the shadows of internal structures. Ribs, maybe. Or the ghosts of the composite housings. Something that gave the mass its shape. If it's done collecting, I said, then what's next? Dennis didn't answer. He wrote 64.2 GPH on the daily log and capped his pen. March 4th through March 10th. No new items appeared. 7 consecutive days. The shelves that had been filling since September now held only the original tag debris, the legitimate flotsam we'd recovered from the shoreline. Lobster buoys. Dock line. Fiberglass. A corroded hinge. The assembly had consumed everything it had produced, incorporated every component, and stopped asking for more. But it didn't stop changing. The face developed steadily. By March 6th, the orbital depressions had distinct rims, not open, not revealing eyes, but shaped as though eyelids had formed and closed over whatever was beneath them. The nasal ridge had separated into 2 cartilaginous shapes with visible nostrils, sealed with a thin membrane. The mouth line had deepened into a recognizable lip structure, also sealed, also closed. By March 8th, the overall topology of the mass had shifted. The amorphous bulk was differentiating. The end with the face was narrowing and rounding, a head. Below it, a tapering section that could be a neck. The central mass was broadening laterally, and 2 ridged protrusions were extending from either side. The lower portion had begun to bifurcate. I am describing this clinically because that is how I documented it. I sat in that shed every morning and recorded measurements with a tape measure and a surface thermometer and a stethoscope Dennis had bought at a pharmacy, and I wrote it all down in the daily log in neat handwriting, because the protocol did not have a form for what was happening, and so I made one. Column headers: date, time, ambient temp, surface temp, respiratory rate, pulse rate, dimensional changes, morphological notes. March 9th morphological notes: upper lateral protrusions now approximately 14 inches in length, differentiated into 3 segments separated by visible joint lines. Terminal segment of right protrusion shows 5 subdivisions beginning to separate. Fingers. It was growing arms and fingers. Dennis measured the water output that morning. 68 gallons per hour. Up from 64. The system was becoming more efficient as the organism, I had stopped being able to call it an assembly, grew. March 11th. Voss called Chen. I wasn't on the call, but Chen convened an emergency briefing that afternoon, and I heard the recording. Voss had successfully cultured biological material from the samples he'd taken to MIT in November. The cells reproduced in standard growth media, organized themselves into functional tissue, and began, on their own, without scaffolding, without direction, to construct the same purification membrane structure that existed in the shed. In a petri dish. In a laboratory in Cambridge, Massachusetts. His graduate student Priya had replicated the result in a second lab, independently, using different growth conditions. The technology is real, Voss said. It's reproducible. I can grow purification membranes from these cells in any standard tissue culture facility. A single membrane sheet the size of a dinner plate can process 50 gallons of contaminated water per day to potable standard. I can produce these sheets for approximately 12 cents each. 12 cents. Clean water for 12 cents per unit, forever, for anyone, anywhere. Chen asked, what about the organism in the shed? Is the lab culture behaving the same way? Is it developing? No, Voss said. The cultured tissue grows the membrane and stops. It doesn't differentiate further. It doesn't organize into higher-order structures. It just grows flat sheets of filtration membrane. That's all. So the organism in the shed is doing something different from the cultured cells. Yes. The cultured cells produce the technology. The organism in the shed is producing something else. March 14th. Chen visited the shed. She hadn't been inside since December. She stood in the doorway for a long time before entering, and when she did, she moved slowly, carefully, the way you move through a hospital room. The organism was unmistakably humanoid now. Supine on the workbench, approximately 5 feet 7 inches in length, limbs partially differentiated, head and torso distinct. The skin, I was calling it skin now because that's what it was, had developed a uniform pale tone with a faint translucency, like the inside of a wrist. The chest rose and fell. The closed face was smooth and symmetrical and entirely still except for the breathing. The water lines ran from its lower back, passing through what appeared to be a specialized organ that had grown against the surface of the workbench, a flat, dense structure, about the size of a dinner plate, that connected the organism's circulatory system to the external plumbing. The intake line brought raw harbor water in. The output line carried purified water out. The organism was the filter. Its body was the technology. Chen stood beside the workbench. She looked at the face for a long time. Has it opened its eyes? She asked. No. Has it made any sound other than breathing? No. Has it moved? Any voluntary movement at all? No. Just the respiration and the pulse. Chen reached into her coat pocket and took out a folded document. She handed it to me. It was a letter on Commonwealth of Massachusetts letterhead, from the Department of Environmental Protection, addressed to the Carrick City Manager's office. I read it. The state had been monitoring Carrick's water quality reports. The improvement over the past 4 months had been, in their word, unprecedented. They were requesting a site visit to document the city's water treatment methodology for potential application to other municipalities. They were proposing Carrick as a pilot site for a statewide water quality initiative. They were offering a $2.3 million infrastructure grant. This came yesterday, Chen said. The city manager is very interested. Sandra. Look at what's on this workbench. I see it. What are you going to tell the state? I'm going to tell them we've developed an innovative biological filtration system in partnership with MIT. Which is true. And this. I gestured at the organism. The body. The person-shaped thing breathing on the workbench in a municipal debris shed. This is the prototype. Dr. Voss has confirmed that the technology can be cultured independently. The lab-grown membranes don't develop into, she paused. Into this. The technology is separable from the organism. We can have the water purification without whatever this is becoming. Then shut this down. Culture the membranes in Vasa's lab. Disconnect the water lines. Let the organism, let it stop. Chen looked at me. The cultured membranes produce 50 gallons per day per sheet. This organism produces 68 gallons per hour. Over 1,600 gallons per day from a single unit. That's 32 times more efficient than the lab version. And the flow rate is still increasing. So you're keeping it alive because it's more productive. I'm keeping operations running because this facility is providing clean water to 31,000 residents, and the performance data is the strongest evidence we have for securing the state funding that will allow us to deploy the lab-cultured version at scale. If I disconnect this system now, the water quality drops, the state withdraws the grant proposal, and the technology that could help millions of people loses its most compelling proof of concept. She picked up the daily log binder and paged through it. My neat columns. My careful measurements. My morphological notes describing the development of arms and fingers and a face. Your documentation is excellent, she said. Continue the daily log. Continue the protocol. She left. March 17th. Dennis and I were eating lunch on the bench by the seawall. It was cold, low 40s, overcast, the harbor gray and choppy. Marcus Webb was up in the lighthouse replacing a corroded conduit fitting, and we could hear him working, the distant ring of a wrench on pipe. I called Rita last night, Dennis said. I hadn't spoken to Rita since she left in March. She'd transferred to the parks department, mowing, tree trimming, playground equipment maintenance. As far from the waterfront as you could get within DPW. How is she? She asked me what it looks like now. What did you tell her? I told her the truth. She was quiet for a long time. Then she asked me if I was going to leave. What did you say? Dennis took a bite of his sandwich and chewed slowly. I told her I couldn't. And she said she understood. And then she said something that I've been thinking about since. He set the sandwich down. She said, you know the protocol doesn't have a step for when it wakes up. And she's right. Chapter 14.7 covers recovery, sorting, storage, and disposal. It covers hazmat response. It covers quarterly audits. It doesn't cover what happens when the material in storage opens its eyes and sits up and looks at you. It might not do that. It has a face, 2 arms, 2 legs, a circulatory system, a respiratory system, and something Voss thinks is a brain. What's it going to do, stay asleep forever? I didn't have an answer. Here's what I keep coming back to, Dennis said. Every morning we walk in there and follow the rules. Sort by material class. Maintain the cold locker. Log the intake. File the quarterly report. And every morning, the thing on the workbench is a little more finished. We're not building it. We're not feeding it. We're not touching it. We're just maintaining the conditions. Following the protocol. And the protocol is what lets it grow. Rita said the same thing. Rita was right about everything. She left because she was right. I stayed because of the water. And the water is real, and the water is helping people, and I can't make that not matter just because the source is something I don't understand. He picked up his sandwich again. But I think about the protocol. I think about how it was written in 2009 because a kid picked up a needle. 23 pages of rules about how to sort and store debris. And now those rules are growing a person. The rules weren't written for this. Nobody designed this. but the rules are what made it possible. He looked at me. What happens when we stop following them? I don't know. I don't either. And I'm starting to think that's the point. That we keep following them because we don't know what happens if we stop. And it keeps growing because we keep following them. And neither of us can be the one who finds out, because finding out means either killing something that might be a person or shutting off the water for 31,000 people. He finished his sandwich in silence. We went back to work. March 22nd. Daily log, 7:08. Flow rate, 73.1 gallons per hour. Output quality, all parameters nominal. Surface temperature, 98.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Respiratory rate, 14 cycles per minute, slight increase from baseline. Pulse rate, 72 BPM, new metric, stethoscope reading now consistent enough to track. Dimensional update, length 5 feet 9 inches, increase of 2 inch over 11 days. Limb differentiation complete. Digits distinct on both hands and feet. Facial features fully formed though sealed. New morphological observations. Hair. Fine, dark, approximately 1 centimeter in length, covering the scalp. I noticed it during the morning survey and checked my notes from the previous day. It had not been there on March 21st. Fingernails. Present on all 10 digits. Thin, translucent, properly formed. And one observation I had to write 3 times before the words would stay on the page. At 7:22, during stethoscope assessment, the organism's left hand moved. Not a twitch. Not a reflex. The fingers closed slowly into a loose fist, held for approximately 3 seconds, and opened again. The motion was smooth, coordinated, and deliberate. I watched for another 20 minutes. No further movement occurred. I did not report this to Chen immediately. I sat with it. I sat on the folding chair by the monitoring terminal and I looked at the hand, relaxed, open, resting on the workbench surface, and I thought about what it meant that the organism had moved for the first time. Dennis arrived at 7:30. I showed him the log entry. He read it twice. Voluntary movement, he said. I think so. He approached the workbench and stood over the organism. The face was complete, a human face, young-looking, neither distinctly male nor female, with closed eyes and sealed lips and the absolute stillness of deep sleep. The chest rose and fell. The hand lay open. Dennis reached out and, very gently, touched the organism's forearm. Its head turned toward him. Not fast. Not startling. A slow, smooth rotation, maybe 15 degrees, the way a sleeping person shifts toward a sound. The eyes remained closed. The lips remained sealed. But the face was now oriented toward Dennis instead of toward the ceiling. Dennis pulled his hand back. He stepped away from the workbench. He was breathing harder than I'd ever seen him. Okay, he said. Okay. Neither of us spoke for a while. I'm going to report this, I said. To Chen. To Chen, yes. And to Tarrant. And I'm going to ask, again, for an independent safety review. Dennis nodded. He sat down heavily on the folding chair. Do you think it knows we're here? I don't know. Because that wasn't a reflex. I've seen reflexive movement. I've pulled people out of cars who were unconscious and their bodies moved. That wasn't the same. That was responsive. It felt my hand and it turned to look. Its eyes are closed. It turned to look. I reported to Chen and Tarrant that afternoon. Chen listened. Tarrant listened. I submitted the daily log with the movement observation and the head-turning incident documented in detail. Chen's response was to ask Voss to arrange a neurological assessment. Voss said he'd need to bring in a colleague, a neurophysiologist at Massachusetts General Hospital, and that the NDA circle would need to expand. Chen authorized it. The neurophysiologist, Dr. Amara Osei, arrived on March 25 with a portable EEG system and a bewildered expression that she maintained for the entire visit. She placed electrodes on the organism's scalp, it did not react to her touch, and ran a 40-minute recording. It has organized brain activity, she said afterward, sitting in the shed on the folding chair, staring at her laptop screen. Not just baseline electrical noise. Structured patterns. Theta waves, predominantly, which in a human would indicate deep sleep or a meditative state. Occasional bursts of beta activity, which would indicate alertness or active processing. Is it conscious? Dennis asked. Dr. Osei shook her head slowly, not in denial, but in the way someone shakes their head when the question itself is beyond the frame of available answers. It has the neural architecture for consciousness. Whether it's experiencing anything, whether there's subjective awareness behind these patterns, I can't tell you that from an EEG. Nobody can. But the hardware is there. The brain is functional. The waveforms are organized. If this were a human patient, I would classify this as a coma with retained cortical function and a favorable prognosis for emergence. Emergence, I repeated. Waking up. Yes. If this were a human patient, I would expect this patient to wake up. March 27th. I called Rita. She answered on the second ring, as though she'd been waiting. It's going to wake up, I said. Silence. The neurologist said the brain patterns are consistent with pre-emergence. Deep sleep trending toward wakefulness. She estimated days to weeks. More silence. Rita, I don't know what to do. Yes you do, she said. You know exactly what to do. You've known since September. You lock the shed, you disconnect the water lines, and you stop following the protocol. The water. I know about the water. I know about Voss's lab cultures. I know about the state grant. Sandra called me last week, did you know that? She called to ask if I'd be willing to serve as a technical consultant on the state pilot project. She offered me a promotion. She's building an empire on that thing in the shed and she's using the water to justify it. The water is real, Rita. The water is real. And the thing making it is about to open its eyes. And when it does, it's going to be lying on a workbench in a locked municipal shed with 2 DPW workers and a stethoscope and no legal framework, no medical protocol, no ethical guidelines, and no plan. What are you going to say to it? Welcome to Carrick, Massachusetts, you were built out of debris by a sorting protocol. I didn't say anything. Or here's the other possibility, she said. It wakes up and it's not friendly. It wakes up and it's not human. It wakes up and whatever intelligence was behind this, whatever was sending those components, whatever designed a biological water purifier and wrapped it in a body, is looking out through those eyes. And you're standing 3 feet away. I know. Then why are you still there? I thought about this for a long time. I listened to the harbor through my apartment window, the foghorn from the outer breakwater, the slap of water against hulls, the distant clank of rigging. Because nobody else will be, I said. If it wakes up and nobody's there, it wakes up alone in a locked shed. Whatever it is. Whatever it wants. That doesn't seem right either. Rita was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was different, softer, tired. "You're a good person," she said. "And you're going to walk into that shed tomorrow morning and follow the protocol because you're a good person. And I'm telling you, as someone who cares about you, that being good and being safe are not the same thing, and the protocol was never designed for this, and following rules when the rules have led you somewhere the rules can't help you is not diligence. It's faith. And you need to decide whether that's what you're operating on." She hung up. March 29th. 7:02. I unlocked the shed. Signed the entry log. Walked to the monitoring terminal. Flow rate, 78.6 gallons per hour. I turned toward the workbench. The organism's eyes were open. Not the way I'd imagined, no dramatic moment, no snap of alertness, no sudden motion. The eyelids were simply parted, and two eyes were visible beneath them. Light brown, clear, unfocused, gazing upward at the ceiling joists. The face showed no expression. The breathing continued, steady, 14 cycles per minute. The eyes blinked. Once. Slowly. I stood 12 feet away, by the terminal, my hand still on the pen I'd been using to record the flow rate. I did not move. I did not speak. I watched. The eyes shifted. They moved from the ceiling to the left wall, tracking slowly across the shelves, the metal shelf, the wood shelf, the synthetic shelf. They paused on each one. Then they moved to the right wall. The composite shelf. The empty cold locker, its door open. Then they moved downward, to the workbench surface, to its own body. The eyes examined the chest, the arms, the hands. The left hand closed into a fist again. Opened. The right hand did the same. Then the eyes found me. I felt it. Not physically, there was no pressure, no sensation, nothing I can point to on a chart. But the quality of the room changed. The air changed. The silence changed. Something was looking at me that had not been looking at me before, and I knew it the way you know when someone walks into a room behind you, before you hear them, before you turn. The eyes were calm. Steady. Patient. The mouth unsealed. The membrane across the lips thinned, split, and parted, and the lips beneath were pale but formed, and they moved. No sound came out. Just the shape of movement. The suggestion of a word. I stood there. I held the pen. The monitoring terminal hummed beside me. The flow rate number glowed on the screen, 78.6. The organism looked at me. I looked at it. I reached for the daily log binder, opened it to today's date, and in the morphological notes column, I wrote, 7:04. Eyes open. Responsive to environment. Apparent awareness of observer. Mouth unsealed. No vocalization. I set the pen down. And then I pulled up the folding chair, and I sat down next to the workbench, and I waited. The water kept flowing. 78.6 gallons per hour. Clean and clear and perfect, pouring into the city's pipes, running to kitchens and schools and hospitals, and I sat in a debris shed with something that had built itself out of compliance and was now looking at me with eyes the color of shallow harbor water, and I didn't leave, and I didn't disconnect the lines, and I didn't call anyone. I followed the protocol. I stayed until 3:30. I locked the shed when I left. Tomorrow I'll come back. The daily log is current. The quarterly report is filed. All debris recovery operations conducted in accordance with Chapter 14.7 of the Carrick Public Works Operations Manual. Storage protocols maintained. No safety incidents reported. The water is still clean. And something in the shed is waiting to speak.